Times in the 1930s by David, Vrea, and Owen. The donut, while simple to make, has an interesting past. Millions of American soldiers were fighting in the front lines of France during World War I when the donut was first introduced as a sweet and convenient food. After the war, there were many demands for these snacks as they were understandably addictive. In New York, a man by the name of Adolphe Levet discovered the opportunity presented by selling donuts and created the first donut machine in the 1920s. They became the poster child for fairs everywhere, even being sold at the World Fair in Chicago. As production increased, interest spiked, and an article from the New Yorker debuted the donut in 1931, and Adolphe began making millions of dollars. The 1930s was a time of recovery. Citizens were hurting from World War I, and the Depression left them with little money in their pockets. During World War I, the donut was seen as a comforting reminder of home. They were even served by Red Cross volunteers known as donut dollies in the front lines. The demands of these sweets increased during World War II as well. Bakeries also became a large part of Americans' culture as it developed a sweet tooth. The donut was cheap, and it costs less than a nickel and is easy to eat on the go, pairing well with just about any drink. The culture of America was much more affected by the introduction of the donut than most realize. The need for a food that's fast to make and easy to eat still controls much of our debts today. Americans have always used food as a means of comfort during tough times, and that way of life has built some of the most successful food industries in America. Twinkies were first produced on April 6, 1930 by the manager and baker of Continental Baking Company, James A. Dewar, in Illinois, as a way to use shortbread pans that were no longer in use. With strawberries out of season, one of the bakers created a banana cream-filled cake using the small shortbread pans. During World War II, banana imports all but creased. The company switched to banana cream for vanilla, as we know today.
Hi there, my name is James Dewar, and I'm here to show you some behind the footage of how the Twinkie was made. Now, before we get started here, I'm just going to tell you my idea behind this. I thought to myself one day in the factory, I was like, the troubled times America is going through. What did they experience back then? And I thought, what? Nothing better than a good old treat. So that's exactly what I did. And I was thinking to myself, what kind of treat should I make? It should be something distinctive. So I thought to myself, why not make something that can survive a nuclear war? And I thought, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So today, I'm going to show you how I came up with the Twinkie. Now first off, I care about safety, as you can see. I forgot my lab coat at the factory, so I'm just using a robe. It's okay, it'll work. And I'm going to use some safety goggles, but I don't have goggles, so we're just going to use sunglasses. So, first ingredient, we're going to use a little bit of rice. It doesn't matter how much, you're just going to put some rice in there. It's just to make it a good texture, good consistency. And then you also want to put a little bit of cat food because it seems about right. And then, if you're really into this, you'll just put the whole cat in there. Or sometimes it may run away. You don't really know. You just gotta keep trying to put it in there. It'll work. It'll work. Trust me. And then you're gonna want to put some distilled vinegar in it. You gotta make sure it's distilled. If it's not, in a world of trouble. Then the last step, and this is a very important step, you're just gonna mix all this together. And after that, we're gonna just take a good whiff of all of it. It smells good. Oh, I would eat that and feed that to my children. Anyways, after you have the final product, you just throw it out. And there you go. And that is how the Twinkie was made.
Pink Nick shoestrings, created in the United States in the 1930s, were originally manufactured in San Jose, California. After a change of ownership, shoestring potatoes were sold under the Pink Nick label in the American West, while shoppers in the East knew them as Kobe's. In this time period, ice cream was also very popular, and by the 1937s, Americans were again consuming more than 9 quarters of ice cream a year. The fashion of the 30s is usually overshadowed by the Great Depression, but the 1930s were full of glamour and style. The ideal 30s woman was tall and slender with a very small waist and narrow hips. But since most women were not blessed with slim hips and narrow waists, shoulders were exaggerated with puff sleeves, shoulder pads, full collars, and caplets, or butterflies, or ruffled cap sleeves to make waist and hips appear smaller in comparison. Most sales ads and catalogs features artistically drawn women who were 3 times as tall and thin as any real woman could be. The ideal silhouette was anything but realistic. What was typically worn? Silk blouses, calf-length skirts with inverted front slights and flare bottoms, cut tee dresses with puff sleeves, wide leg pants for the sporty look, floor-length gowns in silk satin, a silk slip, and must-have accessories included a tilt hat or beret, a fur coat, patterned silk scarves, gloves, and plenty of blinks. Women's shoes consisted of small perforations or holes and intricate designs of the body of the shoe, and are trademark of 1930s shoes, as well as thick straps, full coverage, and lace-up mid-heel Oxfords. Emphasis was on comfort and durability, as well as price during this Depression era. Yet in the evenings, old Hollywood glamour inspired an elegant range of dancing heels. Women's shoes in the 1930s were all high heels, and even sports shoes had a small flat heel. Cuban heels, Spanish heels, military heels, and built-up heels were typically worn in the 1930s and were usually made of wood. Makeup in the 1930s consisted of pencil-thin eyebrows, and what is one of the standout features. In some cases, women had their eyebrows plucked away entirely by overzealous beauty salons and had to paint in their brows every morning. Other features that followed were eyes, usually blues, greens, pinks, purples applied lightly in pear shapes beyond the natural eye. Eyebrows, as was mentioned, was plucked out of existence and redrawn in pencil-thin lines, arched more attractively upwards. Lips, the cupid bow was replaced by thinner horizontal lines with upper lips enlarged and fuller. Popular colors are raspberries, reds, and maroon. Lashes, mascara moved to the lower lashes only with lifted eyes out. Rouge, the triangle was the new look and contouring faces was in vogue. Nails, the moon manicure remains and nail and lip colors sold to match, and typically short wavy hair was the style to frame the face. Men's fashion typically included tall pants, overcoat, an athletic body, shirts and sweaters, classic hats, and slick-back, well-kept hair.
These are the top 10 problems in the United States. The Dust Bowl, also known as the Dirty 30s, it was a period of severe dust storms that greatly damaged the ecology and agriculture of basically farmlands. It's basically just severe drought and failure to apply dry land farming methods to prevent wind erosion that caused the Dust Bowl. So this is the Great Depression. Everybody knows what the Great Depression is about, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The Great Depression was basically a severe worldwide economic depression that took place mostly in the 1930s. It basically happened in the 1930s and continued in 1932. And when it was over, everybody's like, yay, it's over. But it began in the United States and it continued to the world. So the New Deal, this was in response to the Great Depression, because the Great Depression, stock market crash, losing money, So the New Deal was a series of programs, public work projects, financial reforms, and regulations enacted by the United States, FDR, the president, in 1933 to 1935. And as I said, this was in response to the Great Depression. So, FDR, the first 100 days, I'm probably sure you guys never heard of that, right? Well, you're hearing about it today. The term first 100 days, alternately written as first, 100 days, the number, typically refers to the first 100 days in the first term of a president of the United States. It may refer to the first 100 days of Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency. American culture back then was art, design, jewelry, and other areas. Also, jazz music was an enormously popular style of music throughout the 1930s, with an emphasis on improvisation and syncopation. This is a modern, lively style that helped bring a bit of joy to the Americans struggling through the Great Depression, because people were poor, they didn't have money, they were scrapping for food, dads couldn't get jobs. Yeah, stuff like that. So, the first New Deal, right? This is the second one. The second New Deal is basically the same as the first one, to help out the Great Depression. And this was made right after the first New Deal, didn't kind of work. It kind of worked, but it didn't. And it was created in 1935. Now, back to the Great Depression. The Great Depression ended, a long time ago. But when the Great Depression ended, it was like the good old days are back again. It was like the best time ever. People were getting money back, banks reopened, and people started dancing, kids started getting food, dads started getting jobs, moms and families just started getting houses again. It was a very happy time for the American population. So, World War II, we weren't actually in it until 1941 when Pearl Harbor was attacked by Japan forces. But we were still shipping a lot of, stuff to other countries that were in the war. So you could say we were kind of in it, and we were kind of not at the same time. But it's your opinion, not ours. So Pluto was discovered in 1930 in Arizona, but in 2006 it was called a dwarf planet because it didn't have specific requirements to meet our requirements. So Pluto, as you know, was discovered in 1930, and it was discovered by Klein, Tonnenbach. Franklin Delano Roosevelt Sr. was often referred to by his initials FDR. He was an American statesman and political leader who served as the 32nd President of the United States from 1933 until his death in 1945.
The Asian Great Depression started a year after the American Great Depression started in 1930. The Asian Great Depression hit an all-time low in 1933. After 1933, the prices got a little bit better, but they never fully recovered until World War II started, and they started to make weapons and gain profits. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria began on the 18th of September, 1931, when the Kuomintang Army of the Empire of Japan invaded Manchuria, immediately following the Mukden incident. The Japanese established the puppet state of Manchukuo, and their occupation lasted until Soviet Union and Mongolia launched the Manchurian Strategic Offensive Operation of 1945. In 1933, the Loch Ness Monster was first photographed. While nobody knows for certain whether or not the Loch Ness Monster is real, many people have developed conspiracy theories that may just be pictures of like mundane objects, just like boats and stuff. People have misidentified. The Spanish Civil War started in 1936 and ended in 1939. It was a war between the Republicans and the Nationalists. The Republicans were very democratic, but the Nationalists were very conservative, and they were led by a man named Francisco Franco. At the end of the war, the Nationalists won, and Franco ruled over Spain until his death in November 1975. In 1936, Stalin began the Great Purge. The Great Purge was a movement that eliminated all people who had ideas against his rule. This killed everyone who would even speak out against Stalin in any way, or have any thoughts. So if they didn't actively support Stalin, they would be killed. This was a time of great fear for all Russians, because your neighbors, if they didn't like you, they could just say that you were talking bad about Stalin and have you executed. Jesse Owens was an African-American track and field athlete who competed in the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Jesse Owens won 4 Olympic medals for the 100-meter race, 200-meter race, the long jump, and the 4 times 100-meter relay. He was the most successful athlete at the Games, and as a black man, he was credited with single-handedly crushing Hitler's myth of Aryan superiority. The Rhineland was a large portion of land between Germany and France to protect France from Germany and to act as a border. But in 1936, Hitler invaded the Rhineland, and the British Prime Minister did nothing about it because he was an appeaser. Hitler only became stronger from this, and he continued his conquests and became a world power and started World War II. World War II began in 1939 and ended in 1945. It started as a result of Hitler invading more lands like Czechoslovakia. Many people were killed in this war. For the Allies, they lost over 61 million people, 45 million of which were civilians. The Axis powers lost over 12 million people. In 1939, Hitler invaded Poland along with Soviet Russia. Soviet Russia and Hitler both wanted a piece of Poland, so they split it up and they both conquered part. However, later in the war, Hitler decided that it wasn't enough for him, and he decided to invade further. He turned out that he invaded Soviet Russia, and then Soviet Russia retaliated and joined the Allies and attacked Hitler with us. In 1939, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain, signed the Munich Pact, which sealed the fate of Czechoslovakia, virtually handing it over to Germany because of appeasement. Although the agreement was to only give Hitler the Sudeten land, the part of Czechoslovakia where over 3 million ethnic Germans lived, it also handed over to the Nazi war machine 66% of Czechoslovakia's coal, 70% of its iron, and 70% of its electrical power.